All right. Hello, everyone. We are a mastermind of financial coaches on this call, which is incredible to see. And the topic we're going to be discussing is feeling inspired by somebody versus copying them. And where is that line? Where's the gray area? So we wanted to have this discussion because I think it's important to all of us. I think most of us don't want to accidentally copy somebody and disrespect them and hurt them and that kind of thing. And sometimes we just don't know if we're doing that right or wrong or that kind of thing. I do think that so many of us have had this conversation on the back end. And I think we should just discuss it and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So I really want to set some ground rules at the start of this meeting. The first one is that I would like to ask you guys to be as specific as possible when you're giving examples. So instead of saying something like, if you're using stuff from someone else, that's not specific enough. What does stuff mean? Are you talking about an image? Are you talking about an idea or a concept, a handout, a creation? Are you talking about a quote from them? Like, what specifically is stuff, and where is the sharing happening? So is it privately to a client, one-on-one conversation? Is it in their marketing it so they're like now making it free for everybody else to possibly see? Is it sort of behind a paid wall? All sorts of things. You can share those types of things everywhere. So when it comes to when we're giving examples later, please try to be as specific as possible because it could change what people think of that, okay? Second ground rule is I'm actually not really interested in having a legal discussion around this. One, I don't know if any of us have legal degrees or legal experience. I know I don't, but I actually feel like too sometimes when we're talking about whether or not something is illegal, I kind of feel like the line has already been crossed, and it's bad. If it's illegal, it's bad, right? So that's not really what I want to talk about. I'm more interested in having this conversation from the perspective of professional courtesy. Okay. So treating each other with respect in a way that is, how we would want to be treated ourselves or how we would feel if our material was being used in that way. Not whether or not it's against the law, just because it is the right thing to do. We want to have professional respect for one another. The last thing that I want to discuss before we dive into the discussion is I want us to keep in mind why people might copy you. Okay. Why this might happen. And I feel like if we can keep this in mind and have a little bit of compassion or empathy on why this might happen and that it's not always intentionally on purpose to do something wrong, it might help us guide the conversation in a very healthy, productive way. So I actually wrote down 3 reasons why I think people copy or maybe cross the line into copying versus simply being inspired. The first one is that they're purely in survival mode. So when we're trying to survive, we can feel very boxed in. We can feel as if we don't have a lot of choices. We can get desperate, right? And honestly, we can simply act stupid when we're desperate, right? And I mean that in a loving way. What that means to me when I say stupid is just that we do something that we know is wrong. We make a decision that we know we shouldn't make. That's sort of the definition of stupidity in this sense. And it comes from that desperation and wanting to survive. And we can be desperate because we are learning so much. And we're overwhelmed by I just don't know what to do first, so I got to do something. So I'm feeling desperate with taking action. And we just want to feel like we're feeling good at something, right? Like we're brand new at everything when it comes to business sometimes. And so, instead of, learning everything new, this is working for this person over here, so I'm just going to do that too, right? And so we copy it because out of desperation in that sense. And other times I think we can be financially desperate where we just need that client or we need a sale and we need somebody to sign up. And hey, look, this financial coach over here is doing this and it's working for them. They're getting clients. So I really need that client. So I'm going to do that too. So I think sometimes simply they're in survival mode. And that's where that comes from. The second reason why I think people might cross that line is simply a lack of understanding. So I think there can have, their level of understanding in the coaching world, maybe who they are as a coach, or who they are serving. And I mean, intimately understanding all of that is simply lacking. Okay. And sometimes you can look at somebody else, and I know so many people have said this to me, is oh, you make it look so easy. But what somebody, when you're first starting and you are lacking a little bit of understanding, what I think it's not as easy to understand is that what makes it look easy is a level of mastery. And what creates mastery is practice and experience and figuring it out for yourself and doing it wrong a couple of times in order to figure out what really feels right. So, copying somebody in that way, you're never going to reach mastery. It's never going to get easy for you if you, take that route, sort of thing. And then the third one, which I want to believe is the most uncommon reason that people sort of cross the line from feeling inspired to copying, is a lack of integrity. So this is when I think like their actions are purposeful, they're inconsiderate, they're flat out wrong, they know exactly what they're doing and they simply don't care. They're looking for the easy way out, not the right way. And they'll take the easy way even if they know it's not the right way. And I want to believe that that is few and far between, right? I really don't feel like most of us attract those kind of people. And I feel like those kind of people don't last very long in business anyway, because, that's not the long-term game, right? Like that's a very short-term game usually. The first two can be addressed by communication. And, there's been a couple of times where I've had to have this conversation with people where I really, truly feel like they did it and they didn't do it on purpose. They're not a bad person. And I simply reach out to them in like the most loving way possible and say, hey, I can see that you did this. I don't think you meant to do this, but I don't think this is going to work well for you long-term. And I ultimately want what's best for you. And so, going forward, please either give credit where credit is due, or, let's talk about how we can finesse that and be better for you going forward. And if, you communicate in that way, where you're always giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, you're sort of trusting them first that like they didn't mean to do this. What I have found is their response is usually very apologetic. They are usually very upset with themselves. They feel terrible. People have cried and said, I'm so sorry, like I didn't mean to offend you. Like it's simply one of those other things that they didn't know what they didn't know, sort of thing. And that really leads me to why I wanted to have this conversation, is because once we know better, we can do better, right? For all of us. And I want to have this discussion that way we're understanding and respecting each other's boundaries and, having a dialogue around it. So I wanted to start, let me give you an idea of what some of the questions that I thought we could all discuss today. The first one is talking about like, what are the downsides, first of all, to copying somebody or using someone else's brand to like facilitate your own marketing or your own materials or to facilitate your own skills? What are some of the pitfalls of doing that to us? Okay, so not on the receiving end, but if I'm the one doing the copying, why does that hurt me? Okay, so I want to have that conversation and just call out some of those things. The other thing that I want to do is talk about what is your understanding of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and address some very specific examples of maybe when you felt torn. Like, is this enough? Have I done enough? Is this okay? Maybe you see somebody do something and you're just not sure. You're really conflicted or feeling torn on whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. I really want to talk about some of those very specific examples and have us discuss those. The other thing that I want to discuss is what are some of the absolute no-nos. So we might know the bookends of this conversation. In other words, we might know this is when it's wrong. This is when it's okay. These are like the best practices for how to do this right. And then let's talk about some of those examples in the gray area where we feel conflicted and talk about like, how would we like to address those going forward if it were me? Okay. The last thing is some rules of thumb. So again, like how to do the things right. So if you are going to use someone's material, how can you do that in the best way possible and serving them really well with that step that you're about to take? And then if we have time, there's a couple of things that I've added to the end, some specific examples sort of from my experience in my life that, may or may not lend to some good ideas. And then also maybe places to find inspiration for our business that's not other financial coaches or not financial advisors. That way we're not feeling as if we are taking their material directly and applying it. In order to feel inspired and use it, we have to change it because it doesn't apply to our industry, for example. Like, what are some of those places where we can gain inspiration? And then we will button it up with questions if we have time for that. So let's dive in. Does that sound good? So you guys give me a thumbs up or type thumbs up into the, oh good, lots of thumbs up. Okay. So first and foremost, let's all brainstorm together. What are some, and you can either open up your mic or put it in the chat, whichever way is easiest for you. What are some of the downsides for your brand of copying somebody else's? Why is this like a short-sighted thing? Yes, Claire.
So I think in this case, it's when you're starting out, and if you take somebody else's brand or trying to mirror it, you actually are hurting yourself more and working harder because you're trying to pigeonhole yourself into somebody else's beliefs. And I think in time, you'll find out you may not align with that exactly. So you took something in the thought that you needed it to move forward. And what you've done is really put yourself backwards.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So you can, what did you say? Pigeonhole? Pigeontail?
Pigeonhole.
Pigeonhole. Yeah. Okay. I'm like, what is that analogy? Okay. Pigeonhole into someone else's beliefs. So then maybe later you find that you're not actually in alignment with that. And now you either have to backpedal or do some corrections or, you know, kind of fix something because you went down the wrong path entirely.
Right.
Yeah, that's so true. What other things do you guys think are downsides to your brand for copying somebody else? Anne says you're unable to be seen as an authority in your own right based on your expertise. Absolutely. I think that is so true. You know, how can you be the leader or a, you know, thought leader or the expert in something if it's literally what somebody else is doing? You know, you can't be. You're the one creating that prospect is torn between two people because it's like all the same, right? Where you don't want them to be torn. You want them to, like, you know, just dive into you because you say things in a way they resonate with, and the other person's going to say something in a way that just isn't connecting with them. Reese says you would probably feel less confident in using that material than you would feel if you had created it yourself. Yeah, like I think less confident, and I also think too, along with that, Reese, is like feeling like an imposter. Like it can actually heighten that imposter syndrome. Like we do it because we have imposter syndrome, right? Like imposter syndrome is very real at the beginning of your business and also later in business. I don't think it ever goes away fully. And what can actually increase that is, you know, copying other people and feeling as if it's not your own. Or feeling like a fraud. So there's like the fraud syndrome too, where you feel like a fraud. That can absolutely happen too. Chantel says, downsize, not my expert perception on topics or tactics. Not my expert perception on topics or tactics. Okay, so I think you're saying the same thing, Chantel, is sort of like you're not the authority, you're not the expert on that topic. You're sort of like always duplicating it from somebody else. Is that right, Chantel?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm on Apple, a brand new computer, Apple keyboard, and I'm having fat finger situation. So I apologize. But yeah, if I'm not speaking in my own expertise perception, then I won't be able to pivot and to really advise my clients on how to handle challenges or obstacles that they encounter, because I'm like, you know, everyone else is saying, pigeonholed into something I don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Heather says you don't come across as authentic. It's harder to speak to your ideal client in your own voice. Yes, totally. I had written down, and I think this is sort of the same thing, Heather, is, you know, I feel like if you've got everyone else's voices in your head, it drowns out your own, right? So you can't even like identify your own voice anymore because it's so drowned out by what everyone else is doing and saying and that kind of thing. Kevin says, lack of originality and inspiration to go on from your current place. Yeah, we just read a great book in our book club. Oh, I just posted it. Oh, there it is. The Dance of the Possible, and it's like the Irreverent Guide to Creativity or something. And he talks about how creativity is a muscle, and you've got it. You can get stronger and you can get better at it, but you have to practice, and you can feel really, you know, not creative, but the more you practice creativity, the more creative you can become. And the more skilled you can feel at creativity. Like it's easier to turn it on and off then once you get better at it. So if you're always copying from somebody else, you're stifling your own creativity, right? You really are. You might not be speaking to your ideal client. Thank you, Dorinda. Yes, that is so true. So you're speaking to someone else's ideal client if you're copying their stuff. Right? So true. Storm says, you don't learn how to create on your own. So later when you realize a change in your ideal client or niche, or you need a new client process, you don't know how to do it yourself. Each iteration you get better. That is so true, right? Like you kind of have to know, you learn so much from doing it wrong, right? Whether that's like working with the wrong client one time. And by wrong, I don't mean that it was like dreadful by any means, right? It was just like not great. And you can learn so much about working with the right client when you work with the wrong client. And if you keep, not doing that, then you're never getting to that greater iteration. And same with marketing, right? Like you get better with your marketing as you feel like, okay, I'm posting these types of things and it's crickets, but I post this thing and it gets great traction with my audience, right? Like you can really start to figure out what works and doesn't work. Name of the book again, Renata, it's by Scott Berkun, Berkun is the last name. And I'm looking at my bookshelf in case you're wondering what I'm doing. The Dance of the Possible is the name of it. And then it's like the irreverent guide to blossoming your creativity or something like that. But yeah. I think your messaging is off because you're not talking to your ideal client. Yes, absolutely, Nicole. Jacqueline says, to piggyback off the ideal client thing, if you use their messaging and it works in terms of getting you new clients, now your calendar is full of clients who are wrong for you and you're frustrated, burnt out, etc. Yeah, you could be, sort of playing the short-term game and it's not serving you long-term and you end up getting frustrated, resentful, burnt out, all those things, maybe just throwing up your hands and saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm not good at this, maybe even, right? If you're not working with the right clients, maybe you end up not getting them great traction or great results. And what that does for us as coaches is like really plant some seeds of doubt if one client after another isn't getting great results, right? And all of that could stem back from, poor marketing or, inauthentic marketing maybe. Let's see. Any other ideas?
I was thinking, Kelsa, there would be fear for me. I would be so scared if my client found out somewhere else on the web that the material I'm presenting to him or her was copied from somewhere else. That would really hurt my business. That would hurt my credibility. I'd be so scared. And, you'd be operating under this shroud of fear because the work is not yours. It's like cheating on the test. I would be just really fearful if my client found out. What would I do if they found out?
Yeah, I totally agree. And so then if you think about it, you're making future decisions from a place of that fear, right? Or maybe you don't promote it in all these unique ways because you're like, well, I'm just going to put it here because only a few people will see it. So it ends up being that vicious cycle you're creating for yourself. Yeah, great point, Bernadette. I think you're totally right. Any others? I had written down, if you're copying others, then you're always behind. You're always playing catch up instead of innovating and speaking your own way. Speaking your own way takes practice. It takes time. It takes a little bit of trial and error, but you won't ever reach that mastery level if you don't put in the work, right? So you're always playing catch up. And again, back to that reason why some people do it is because their desperation comes from a place of overwhelm. They're just learning so many new things. They just can't take on one more new thing. So they're like, well, I'll just copy this thing for right now, right? But what that's actually doing is making it so you're even more behind. You're not actually solving a problem of overwhelm. You're creating a bigger problem of overwhelm down the road. I actually put, that it hurts. Let's see, how do I word this? It hurts you more than it hurts me. So somebody who copies me, it actually hurts them more than it hurts me. So I think it also hurts the industry as a whole. It hurts that coach's potential. I really do feel that way. It hurts their ability to get clients and clients who truly connect with them, which is essentially what we're all saying, right? Like it really does. And like, it might bother me, right? It might frustrate me and annoy me and be like, oh, that's, seems wrong. And it might feel like a violation to me. But at the end of the day, like that's a short-term sort of feeling that I'm going to have compared to the long-term struggle that they're creating for themselves. Let's see. I think we've talked about most of these. I think the other one too, and I think Reese, talked about this a little bit as far as like that confidence. So much of this is like really feeling as if you can be yourself and the people who are attracted to you love you for that, and you don't have to hide who you are. You don't have to like only share a portion of your personality and feel judged and all of that. And, you know, I feel like your business blossoms when you start to embrace all of your own natural skills and your own quirky personality traits like we all have, right? And so I think if you keep holding yourself back in the way of like using everybody else's material, then it ends up, you know, stifling your own confidence and pride in sort of who you are and that authentic self. Scott says, I think there's a different threshold for different aspects of your business. You shouldn't copy someone's marketing materials, but you might want to mimic their process, especially if you're not established. That to me feels different. Yes, I totally agree, Scott. So when we talk about like very specific examples, that was exactly why I wanted us to be extremely specific when we get to the examples around like, what exactly are you talking about copying? When you say stuff, like what are we talking about and where? Because it's one thing, and we can just kind of move into this next section now. I think it's like a perfect segue, Scott, is, you know, the idea of if I am using it in my marketing and you are using it in your marketing, it's like everybody's seeing it, right? Where I should be able to decide if it's my creation, I should get to decide when it is shared, how it is shared, like I should be in control of that, right? If it is something that I am doing with my client privately behind the scenes and I give it to you as a tool to use with your clients and you give it to your one client, you know, that's a private meeting, that's probably not a big deal. But if you then take that thing I gave you because you said your client needed it and then you start sharing it with everybody in your marketing or something like that, I mean, I think that's one of those examples if we want to talk about some of these gray areas, like where does the gray area happen? Like, yes, permission was given to use that thing, but not necessarily to give freely to everybody else so that they can then use it as well. Does that make sense? Do you guys see what I'm saying?
Yep.
What are other gray areas? Scott says, I think that's when people are not sure when they cross the line. Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. So what are some of the things that like are that gray area where you're just not sure of? Like you found yourself wondering like, have I done enough? Or is this okay? Is someone gonna, like that fear Bernadette was talking about, like you posted something and you maybe had that fear a little bit around, you know, gosh, is somebody gonna call me out? Yes, Nicole, I'm gonna unmute you. Yeah, go ahead.
So, okay, I think this is a great conversation because it's hard because I always find myself being like, okay, what does, like, I'll give Dave Ramsey for an example. What does he own? And then what is like personal finance, like know-how, which is like debt is bad, right? Does he own the debt is bad? No, but he owns his baby steps, right? So it's like that funny line because I'll find myself where I'll say, oh, I read that in Dave Ramsey's book, right? So am I allowed to say that? Am I even allowed to say that same idea? Does he own debt-free? Does he own that idea? And it's like, no, he doesn't own that idea, you know? So
he
it's,
does.
right. It's like if you commit to it, then you're like, am I on his brand? But I don't know. I feel like I found like an interesting, I'd love to get people's feedback on it because, so I went through FCA.
Yeah.
And I love the plan ahead method and like the worksheet and all of that stuff. And so in my clients, like I will use it and I use the branding that says copyright. Mm-hmm. This is fiscal fitness. You know, my mentor taught me this, but it's funny because I've actually come up with my own framework for doing a budgeting at all. Yeah. That isn't the plan ahead method. Sure. And so I was like, well, wait, what do I call this? You know? And so it's like this funny idea of where I was like, okay, I have 4 steps to how I like to do my budgeting system. I call it this. Is that mine now? You know, like it's like this question where I'm like, so do I need to get a copywriter to say that this is my like framework? But it's like, what is just know-how, like how to put in a budget, which is like, you need to look at your past expenses. Mm-hmm. You need, you know what I mean? Like there's all these things that we all do. And I feel like we can get in this like feedback boomerang from HEL, like from hell. because they'll be like, well, is saving really my idea? Like, it's like you'll have to give everybody credit everywhere. So I don't know. I've like literally thought about those things because I use like parts of your method, but I always give you credit, you know?
Let's open this up. And I will say that one thing that I, try to do is give credit where credit is due. So I will sometimes say like, this idea was inspired by the works of this person or something along those lines. So just to give you a couple of examples, like, and if you've done FCA, Nicole, you'll know what I'm talking about. So we have this exercise called the Areas of Life exercise that we call it. And it was actually created off of the concept, the book OOLA or OOLA, or like the Wheel of Life. If you guys have seen those before, there's a few different ways that it's out there. And I read that book and I think they have like 5 different categories. I don't remember. And I liked the concept, but I felt like it needed even more. So I now have like 15 different areas out of their 5. Even now, though, when I teach that concept and I call it Areas of Life, I feel like, Nicole, now it has truly become like my own creation. I've taken a step further. Even now, when I teach it to a client, I say, I got this idea from this book. And the reason I do that is because if they ever want to dive deeper into the concept, they kind of know where to go, right? And the original idea that spurred the whole thing came from that book for me personally. So I don't mind saying, hey, what spurred this is this. Another example is Brett Kessel's book. It's Not About the Money, I think. Yeah, It's Not About the Money. So he's got like this mindset exercise you can do. And again, I think there was like 50 or 60 different statements and you score those statements. I loved the idea of that. We took that, and our exercise now has like 120 statements or something, because I took it and I was like, this needs to be even more. Does that make sense? So what I do is I'll give that exercise to a client, but I will tell the client like this, concept came from this book. The other reason is like, if they ever want to dive deeper into that, they can. Like, I have some clients that love to geek out over this stuff too. And I'm not going to dive into all the various perspectives on that idea when I teach it. I'm going to talk to that client specifically, but the client might want to go read the book and dive in even deeper to like some of those concepts. Does that make sense? So I think saying like this idea was inspired by is a really great way of just saying like, this is now my original idea, but the original concept was inspired by this person or something like that. But I would love to hear from you guys, because how do you feel good about that? And I will say one more thing is I ask myself, if it were me, would I be okay with it? Like, what would I want, right? And if you've adjusted something, even if you feel like you've adjusted it or modified it like a lot, like I feel like I've modified those 2 examples like pretty extensively, I still feel like, what does it hurt to give credit, right? To that initial thought that seed was planted by somewhere. Does that make sense? Like I think sometimes people have this fear that like, if I say that, then they're going to go and like hire that person instead. And it doesn't work that way. Like our clients don't care really. I think it's more about our own integrity that we want to feel good about that, is ultimately really important. But, what do you guys think? What do you think about like ways that you've done that feels good to you, ways that you've seen other people do it that you're like, don't do it this way. Whatever you do, don't do it that way, sort of thing. Maybe it's rubbed you the wrong way. What are some ways that you move forward with that?
Well, I'm going to throw myself under the bus here.
Okay.
Right under the bus. So I started off using the plan ahead method. I give you full credit for that. But I'm sitting at my computer one day and she's told people that to track their expenses by date. That's good, but there's nothing to do that by. So what I did was created a sheet for them to do that.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I made it long enough that they can do it by Excel or by hand.
Right.
And now I'm giving you credit for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where it's like the way you say it, I think is important. So saying like this idea was inspired by, and please know that I'm not saying you guys have to do that every time. This is just an example that you guys brought up. So maybe we use a different example and maybe that would be a little easier. What about like the snowball method? I see this brought up a lot. Like, do we have to, like, who created the snowball method? Does anybody know? Can we track that back in any way and see who? Chantel says, not me. Adam, what are your thoughts? I see you have your hand raised. Thank you. Oh, let me, yeah.
Oh, I don't have any thoughts about the snowball method.
Yeah, you're fine. Keep going.
But I think two things came to mind. One was, so I cut my teeth as a coach, learning a lot of program. I did a lot of programs at this place called Landmark that has a interesting and controversial reputation in the personal development world. And I remember I wanted to honor my agreements with them when I was starting my coaching business. So someone's like, oh, you should call their headquarters and ask, about like coaching. And I got this guy on the line who basically told me, if you don't know another coaching methodology, then you shouldn't coach at all. And he tried to sound like a lawyer, but for those of you who know me in the chat, I am a lawyer. At least I don't practice anymore. But like, if you're a lawyer, you can see right through somebody who's trying to sound like one and isn't. And I was just like, this guy is not right. And, I spoke to friends, plenty of people who've done Landmark, have their own coaching businesses outside of it. And they're like, look, as long as you're not like using Landmark's forms, right, you should be fine. You're not, because even a program like that is borrowing from things like Buddhism and, existentialism and whatever. So that's kind of how I've been. But funny enough, I recently had a client who's done a lot of Landmark. And when I told him I did, he's like, oh, I had no idea. I couldn't tell at all from the way you talk, because they have a distinct kind of jargon. So just a personal experience that made me laugh. But and then the other thing is, I guess, when we're acknowledging people, this is a place where I've definitely seen like, what's the term? Implicit bias play a role. So like where it's really easy for us to like take the work of other groups that we're not a part of, like especially as men, it's like really easy for us to take the work of women and just not on purpose, but just kind of like present it as our own. And that's kind of a notorious thing. There's a conversation on like mansplaining, it's called. And so just to share that, like, yeah, Chantel just mentioned it. So just something that I think we should definitely be aware of, like, okay, who may have come up with this, like what's having us acknowledge them or not, to make sure that we're being really mindful about it.
Yeah. And do you have any examples, Adam, of like something that you have seen people do where either the mansplaining or taking someone's idea and like it's not good? Do you have an example of that or no?
Of when someone took an idea and it wasn't good?
Or like shared it as if it was their own, or you kind of know that it wasn't, or...
Well, there was a recent example, and certainly I encourage people to go and read the words of other women, and particularly women of color, written about this. But like Rachel Hollis is a pretty popular entrepreneur. She's a white female, and a post went up on her account. She said later it was her social media team, but it was, I think, a Maya Angelou quote, and it wasn't attributed at all. And there were a lot of people who were deeply hurt by that, like of having a white woman to not attribute a quote that's a really famous quote to a Black woman. And yeah, there were a lot of great folks out there. I mean, if people are interested, I'm happy to like share some of the people I saw talking about it on social media really thoughtfully. Yeah. But that's a example.
And this is where, great example. And I think we should be offended, regardless of who does it to whom. I really do think, I think it's always important that like, if it's not our quote, if it's not our statement, if we are really like using the words of somebody else, that we should give credit. One of the things that, I'll do in the academy sometimes, or if I do a live video, you guys might've heard me say this, is like, okay, I got, sometimes I'm just riffing when I do a video, and I'll say like, okay, there's this idea, and I got this idea from a book. I don't remember where right now, because I wasn't planning to talk about it, or else I maybe would have researched it for a couple of minutes before I went live. But it's like just part of the conversation. I'm like, this came from someplace. If you know where I got this from, please tell me so I can make sure that I give credit where credit is due. Because sometimes we just can't recall it, right? Sometimes we really don't know like where it came from, and we just can't jog, or maybe it was something we got 10 years ago and we just can't remember. I think it's okay to say that. I think it's okay to say like, this is a great quote, and I have memorized it because it's so dear to me, but I can't remember for the life of me who said it. Please let me know, so I can give credit, sort of thing. Holly says, still love Rachel Hollis, and she openly admitted this on one of her lives and was real honest about it. She's my jam. And it made headlines. Wow. I apparently live under a rock because I didn't know anything about that. So, so what are some other, I think back to the snowball, I think that this is a great example because I think so many people attribute that to Dave Ramsey, and that's fine. I always feel like he made it popular, right? So he gets credit for maybe making it streamlined or more commonplace or more well-known for people. But that's been around for, long before he was born. Like I always joke, my grandparents had cash envelope system. That's another example before the cash envelope system was a strategy, right? So I think it's like, and again, I could easily say like I watched my grandparents do this, right? Like I don't need to give credit to my grandparents. Do they care? No. But does it make sense to sort of say who influenced us on our journey? Does it say, I actually think it makes us look stronger. I think it makes us look more open-minded. I think it makes us look as if we are looking to learn and grow and not just like be the expert in everything and look to others for creativity by stating that like, hey, this idea wasn't influenced by this other person. I think, I have said Brooke Castillo, I love her. I am like obsessed with her. If she puts something on sale, I'm probably going to buy it. I listen to her podcast episodes and I share all the time like, hey, I got this idea from Brooke Castillo. And yeah, I might do it differently. I might put a financial spin on whatever the idea is, or I might, talk about it from a wealth perspective versus maybe she's taking a concept and when she's teaching it, maybe it's a time management thing, right? But the underlying theme is what I got from her. And I still feel as if I should, state that. And I feel like I should state it proudly as well. So what are some other, yes, please, Liz.
I do that. I'm Brooke's, I'm a certified coach with Brooke.
Oh yeah, no, I forgot, but yes, thank you for telling me that. I
forgot. I do that and with Dave, but I do that all the time. I say, I get this from my coaches. So I'm cascading to you. And so I give the reference to, I learned this from Dave in 1997, or this is something I picked up along the way from Brooke. So the other day I was teaching my group and I said, I created this, but you can find pieces of it from Angela Duckworth's Grit. You can find it from Tony Robbins and you can find it from Brooke Castillo. But this part, the way I'm teaching it to you is mine. And that's how I said it.
I love that. So say that again, Liz. Say how exactly do you say that again?
I said you could find pieces of this from Angela Duckworth's book, Grit.
Okay.
You some of it's from Tony Robbins and some of it is from my coach, Brooke. However, I created the way I'm teaching it to you. Mm-hmm. That's how I said it.
I love that wording. Yeah. So I think that's great. I'll sometimes say, my way is like, oh, I was inspired by this, from this person, but I think that's other great way of saying it. I love that.
And they do not care at all. Number one, they don't want to pay Brooke's rates. They want to pay my rates. Yeah. So they don't care. They just want the information.
And Liz, I would love to just ask you a couple more questions about this for everybody. Like, why do you do that? And how do you feel after you do it?
I do it because one, I want to acknowledge those people who taught me. Mm-hmm. And I don't step on, I don't want anyone coming after me saying I did something wrong. That's the other thing. I want to be really clear with that. Mm-hmm. I did post something the other day that I did feel a little off by it.
Ooh, okay.
And this was in my group. And it was the things that you can control going into retirement and things you can't control. Well, it's pretty basic knowledge. It's not like it's anyone's, but there was some wording I got from it was from Chris Hogan article. And I thought, oh, I didn't give Chris Hogan notice. I didn't say I got this from the Chris Hogan article, but it was kind of close off of something Chris Hogan would have, you know what I'm saying? I read his article and then I typed my little message to my private little group afterwards. So it wasn't going out into the but I did afterwards think, to follow up your question, how do you feel? You know, afterwards I thought, I might have should have said Chris Hogan, I got this from this article, or posted the article.
Yes.
Does it? I don't know.
And we'll come back to that in just a second, because I have a thought about that might help everybody too. But like, and how, after you give credit, so to Brooke or one of your mentors or, you know, whoever, like, how do you feel after you've done that?
I feel great. I personally feel like I'm covered, and I also feel like I'm acknowledging people who have taught me.
Yeah, and I just want to recognize something really quickly, like from her example of not quoting Chris Hogan, maybe, and she doesn't know if she should have or shouldn't have, like that, what I'm hearing is like turmoil a little bit, like debate, and like in your mind, mental debate around like, did I do enough? Did I not? Like that turmoil. And like, I don't know when that post was, days ago, like days later, you're now still thinking about it, right? Versus sharing it and just stating it is like a peace of mind. It's like, I've done enough. I have given credit, like I'm, you know, CYA maybe, or just like recognizing, like you were saying, it sort of stops it right there, and it feels so good. It's like a lighter feeling. It's a more open and embracing feeling versus like the thought before of like, did I do enough? Like, it's kind of like shutting down and like stifling creativity, and like, now I'm worried about it. It's like just a very negative energy compared to the other one. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I've experienced it this week with both yin and yang. So
I would say, I think that this is a great example of like, pay attention to your own energy around it. That's probably one of the best indicators that we can look at, is like, if we're feeling turmoil, if we're debating whether we've done enough, what would it hurt to just go back and just update it quickly to make that little change, or to state it, because it's like freeing that negative energy to like, now we can move forward with the next idea or the next concept or the next image we want to create or something like that. The other thought that I had too around that, Liz, is, and I actually brought this up it was on my list of like some rules of thumb. And one thing that I think causes confusion for people is the difference between rewording something and reinterpreting it. And I believe rewording something is still wrong. Okay. So like changing two words in like a quote or something, so that, you know, you sort of like say that was enough. That is still, to me, a bit of copying. Reinterpreting it. So saying like, and I would say in some sense, I'm curious, Liz, and we don't obviously have it in front of us, but this Chris Hogan thing is like, you took what he said, but then you interpreted it for your audience. Like you put your interpretation on that. That to me feels very different. Now, again, like where one ends and another starts is still a gray area. But I think that is one thing that you can ask yourself when you're doing things, and this is for everybody, is like, did I just reword this, or did I truly reinterpret this and like put my own spin on it, sort of thing? Does that make sense? I'm curious if that helps, Liz, or like what your thoughts are on that.
Well, what I did is I used his word, and then in parentheses after it, I put my information, right? So what I recommend to do, and I don't think I know now, because I'm questioning it. So I need to go back, because I'm questioning it. I need to go back and just let them know, hey, if you want to read his article, here's the link to his article.
Yeah.
And that would be fine for my group of women. It would be totally fine. It would be possible, because it'd bring it back up to the top. So totally.
Yeah. And the reality is most people don't want to read the whole article. They actually want you to distill it down to them in whatever way is most relevant to them, because you know them better than anybody, right? So still providing it is a source of integrity to let them know, like, I'm not trying to claim this as my own. I'm trying to do right by everybody and that sort of thing. Renata, I think you had your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I think Heather just mentioned it too. You know, like I like the phrase that Chris Hogan says. It's like, you know, the windshield and the rearview mirror, you know, when talking about past mistakes, and they wish they'd done things differently. And I love that phrase. It's like, you know, the reason your windshield is so big so you can see the future and you don't have to think so much about the past in your rearview mirror. And I love that. And I always give him credit. But when I think about that, I think about, you know, we're gathering knowledge from all these different sources. And like you just said, we're compressing it down, applying what we feel like is important to the client. So I think it adds credibility to us when we can quote those sources and let them know where we got it, because we're saying, hey, you know, I'm pulling all these pieces out to help you grow and help you see things maybe differently. So anyway, I just think it adds more to our credibility as well.
Yeah, I love that. And Erica, I think you, I totally agree with that, Renata. I feel like it makes us look more credible, more experienced, like we've invested in our own growth and our own skills. Like, to me, it is something to be really proud of. And I wish I could remember back. I really was thinking about this before we went on, and I was preparing notes and stuff, is like 10 years ago when I, first started, did I give credit or was I afraid to give credit? I honestly don't remember. I truly don't remember. So I think it is normal to maybe be hesitant of that, or wonder like, how is this going to be perceived? Or are they going to go run and like, if somebody quotes me, are they going to then like go follow Kelsa? No, they are not going to do that. Like, I really do not. And if they do, they weren't that person. They weren't your person anyway. It's just something that I think we all have to be aware of and confident in, as hard as that is, right? Like, just trust that. Erica, yeah, my dear.
Yeah, I was actually going to just reiterate what Renata said, is that it builds on your credibility to be learning and growing and even taking the perspective of someone that, something that they've said or you've learned from them and saying, so here's how I would help you implement that in your life and blah, blah, blah. And I think we're doing all the learning because they're paying us too. You know what I mean? Like, I think we actually have a responsibility to bring different perspectives and ideas to the table. And that's how we get to do that, because we've read all these books or we've listened to these podcasts. And the truth is that most of the time they're not doing that stuff. And so, because that's what helps us become the expert and bring interesting perspectives. And yes, bringing, referencing it back or what have you, a lot of the main concepts are not new. It's just helping people implement it is the big thing here too. So.
Yeah. And Erica, how I know you're an experienced coach. So how would you say that what are some of your best practices or things you do that you found work well for you? Like, do you quote it? And if you do, how do you quote, or how do you give that credit? And how do you know that boundary for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's a continual thing because we're always coming up with new stuff. Yeah. I mean, one of the very first things that I did with Dave Ramsey's Baby Steps, I mean, it's not rocket science, but I gave credit and I said the first one I made up and the rest are his. I mean, the first one, this is where I think you ought to begin, and then I'm cool with the rest of what he said here. And, so I just explicitly say that. I think, and actually, if it's written, I don't actually feel like I have to say it, to be honest with you. If I've written it out and they see it on the paper, I don't feel like going there again. Like, if they know
give me, I'm not sure if I understand.
So if I have a sheet of paper or it's a part of their worksheets or whatever it is that I'm giving them and it's written in written form, here are the baby steps. On there it says number 1 is mine, right? Is how I've added to it, enhanced it. Sure. And this is the process I take my clients through. It's written on there. And so I say, here's my 1, 2 through 8 instead of 1 through 7, right? And so, but it's written on there. I don't mince words, I guess, and do extra there. But sure, I mean, Dave Ramsey says it all the time, live like no one else, so I'm like, y'all know he said that. But I don't know. I think sometimes we have to, I think it feels good to give that credit because you feel a release, like you don't have another obligation. And it just, you don't have to worry about it. It's where you worry and you're concerned. It's that you probably do have to go another step, and make sure it's okay, or put that name on there or reference it or what have you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we've got Claire and Storm both have their hands up. So Claire, you first, and then Storm, you're next.
I think the more that you're in the business and creating things, you notice it more. And I think that's when you start to give reference a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I know when I'm mentoring somebody, I have the ability to then share that, because you don't know what you don't know. And so somebody's starting out, they're reading all kinds of things and spewing a lot of it until they find their own footing. And I think the more that you're doing the business, that's when you realize how much your intellectual property is valuable to you. And so you want to give credence to those that you've gotten it from.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah. Storm.
So I'm a choir director for my day job. So I've been teaching kids for 25 years. And one of the things that I do every year is I arrange music. I arrange other people's music and turn it into something that I can use for my groups. So I ask permission from the copyright holder or whatever to do that, write the arrangement, present it to my kids. My kids don't run out of the room thinking I'm a horrible teacher because I've used someone else's music in their class. We are all teachers, right? We're all taking information that we've learned from someone else. We're repackaging it. We're presenting it to our clients in a way that we're adding the perspective that we have to it. So I have never been afraid to say, hey, Kel Siddiqui gave me this. Hey, Coach Connections gave me this. Hey, I thought of this on my own. A client is not going to think any less of you if you cite your sources. That's how we were raised in every educational setting that we've been in. Give credit where credit is due. So from the perspective of worrying about losing a client because you cite someone else as a source, it's just not an issue.
Right. No, I totally agree. Let's see. I'm going to get caught up. We are all teachers. Yeah, I love that too, Renata, when Storm said that. So what other questionable things, like what other situations have you found yourself in that you're not sure about, or if you have found yourself in that, how have you handled it and you think it worked well for you? Yes, Claire.
So I will share, I said it at the beginning on there. So there is a women's networking group, and the leader of the group is famous for talking about R&D. And most of us realize that's research and development to, you know, create your plan. But hers is rob and duplicate. And she preaches this to all of her members. And there are quite a few that take it literally and pretty much copy word for word color brands. And I think that has an issue because this is coming from somebody that's on a national platform. And when you're starting out, you're thinking that this is your mentors telling you this great advice.
Well, and you're thinking like, oh, so that's how everyone's doing it? I thought I had to create it myself. I didn't really, like, you're thinking that that is like common strategy.
Right. Yep. You know, it's the don't recreate the wheel, rob and duplicate. And it's, you know, so those are some walls that you might run into because it's something that has been taught in a national platform, I guess I could say.
Yes, interesting. I am not aware of that. Again, Kelsey lives under a rock, apparently. I did not know about the Rachel Hollis example. I did not know about this women's networking group. Was not invited, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. So, interesting. I would not be able to sit by and, like, you know, observe that. That would give me a stomach ache. It gives me a stomach ache right now just even hearing about it, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, like, you know, what we're saying is like, give credit if you can, because it doesn't hurt to do it. It frees up your energy, like pay attention to how it feels in that moment and use that more than anything, because chances are, again, you know, back to like, why do people do this? I don't think most people do it to be out of integrity. I don't think most people do it for that reason. I think it's sometimes by accident or whatever. I also want to encourage you, if you see somebody do it to you or your things, be honest with them. Have that private conversation. Please do not make it public. That doesn't help anybody or anything like that. You know, maybe just ask them to do a quick phone call with you, message them, be as positive as possible. I think you can also say like, hey, I know I saw this. You know, I noticed that you didn't give credit going forward. This is not going to help you any to thrive. And, you know, really doing it from a caring place, I think is the best way to handle it. Like I was saying, there were a couple of people that I've, you know, reached out to, and every single time they've been extremely apologetic, felt horrible, felt so worried about like offending me and all that kind of stuff. And it was really just like, hey, I get it, right? Like, and that's why it's my job to communicate. And I think sort of set those clear boundaries as well around like, hey, I saw this and, right? So I want to encourage you guys to do that too. Let's see. What are some things that are absolute no-nos? Some things that you're like, you know, don't do this. This is definitely where maybe you've seen other people do it and you can tell that it like rubs people the wrong way or it's not working. Yes, Nicole.
I feel like, so frameworks are something that I feel like I get really upset when you see people copy the same frameworks from each other. So like in like coaching groups that I'll be in, there'll be like a PowerPoint and somebody will say like, this is my framework, you know, XYZ for like business coaching. And they always will say, this is from my business coach. I created this one myself. This one is here, you know, and they always like share what that framework, whose it is, where like they'll talk about how they've seen their frameworks being peddled around, you know what I mean? Like that they'll see somebody else and they're like, I know I'm the one who made that, you know, or it's on my website or it's in one of my freebies or whatever. And it's like, they just take that idea, that image or that acronym or whatever and kind of just rebrand it as if nobody created it, because somebody created it, somebody put the hard work into it, you know?
You're saying, I heard like a few different things there, so I want to make sure that I'm like, you know, understanding you correctly, is like acronyms. So like somebody came up with a phrase and then somebody else takes it and maybe they change the coloring of the image or they change something, but the acronym, they essentially like duplicate it and say, like, start sharing it.
Right. Like if somebody's like, this is my way to know if you should invest, and they come up with an acronym, they brand it and they're like, get on my email list and I'll let you know, whatever. And then somebody gets that and then they just repurpose that same content. Right? Like they're like, remember, I don't know, like the frameworks, I feel like when people put that hard work into making it simple or like understandable, that is that person's intellectual property at that point. So if you don't give credit, that is stealing from that person.
Yeah.
You know?
And this is where my theory behind what you're describing, and I could be wrong, is that I think sometimes the creation, sometimes the most simplest thing that we create is the thing that like takes off, right? Like we put all this work into something super complex and like it, you know, everyone's like, wait, what? And then you create something that is so beautiful in simplicity that what happens, I think, is that it gets confused with general knowledge because of its simplicity. Does that make sense? So then other people take it thinking it's like, well, it's so simple. Like, of course I can just take that. But the whole design of it, the concept behind it was actually the creation of somebody else. Yeah. And this is where I want to make sure that we know we're not talking about the legal aspects of this. Like that, maybe that idea was not, you know, intellectual property. They didn't go through the legal channels to claim that. You know, we're not going to go down that road. It's more of just making sure that we all feel like the way we're doing that is the right way. Does that make sense? Jacqueline, yes.
I'll say two things where I've seen this is like a big no-no. One is I'm taking a course right now and it's been launched a couple of times and I decided to invest this time. But the last launch that she did, one of the people who was part of like her pop-up Facebook group was a mutual friend of mine. And I literally like word for word saw her take her whole launch strategy, do like the exact same Facebook lives literally a week or 2 weeks later, and then was going to attempt to launch the program. I blew the whistle by like private messaging the course creator because I'm a whistleblower. So, and like she handled it and got her to stop and stuff. But I just thought that's so not acceptable because one, this person didn't even buy that program to begin with, like the course itself. So she's marketing a product that she doesn't even have, you know what I mean? Like it just, besides the fact that she's copying, it just felt like such a scam to me because she's trying to get people to buy this thing she hadn't even created. Like, I don't know. It just seemed really weird.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, I feel like I see this a lot in the online space. I'll see it a lot kind of in like the MLM space where people will like just take somebody's whole social media marketing and just copy like exactly the series of posts. It might not be like word for word, but they'll literally just take like somebody's plan and implement it like 2 weeks later. And it's kind of like that same thing about like, if you're using their marketing, if you're using their plan, their strategy and things like that, you're going to be attracting people that aren't your people. And I don't know. It just seemed weird to me. So I saw that a lot in like the whole network marketing side of things.
Well, what's difficult with that in MLM stuff is they actually tell you to do that. generally. Like they'll actually, like your upline would say, this is the strategy that works. Copy it, change some things, and implement.
Which I think,
I mean, like I would see like a leader in the organization and people that were like much lower down, like beginning their thing and like literally just taking what they see this leader doing and then doing the exact same thing kind of thing. Like not like their upline directly, but like that kind of thing. I don't know. It just felt icky to me. And then you're seeing the same post on your social media for this product over and over and over again. So like that also just feels annoying to me. So
that's when you click the 3 dots and say hide because it's redundant.
I will say, so a couple of, things that I put for like one of the best practices is ask permission first, right? Like ask that, maybe that person said, yeah, go ahead and use this. I don't care. We don't always know that, but if you are ever uncertain, ask permission. Hey, do you mind if I share this? Do you mind if I, copy and paste this and make it my own and share it? I love the idea, or I love the concept of it. We saw this a lot during the last couple of months with the flu pandemic. I feel like on our team, we did a really good job of taking very swift action when everything started happening. So we started asking questions. We started doing free Zoom meetings with the community and like all these types of things. And we were posing questions. And then I saw, and here's the thing is the question itself, I don't own that question, right? But what I saw was a lot of other people taking that question and putting it on their website or on their social media feed or asking their community that question. And that in one sense is fine because it's just a question. But here's where I think the gray area where you could cross the line is it wasn't just a one-time thing. I believe it was a very intentional act by some people. And what I mean by that is like, we would post something and then within 24 hours, another coach would post the exact same thing. That day we would post something new. And then 24 hours later, they would then post the exact same thing all over again. So it wasn't just like one time, it was like, hey, these are really great questions to ask. So every day I'm going to follow Fiscal Fitness and I'm going to use those same questions in my own marketing, as opposed to what we were talking about, stopping and thinking about like, what are people experiencing right now while all of this is happening? What are their fears around money? Because that's what I was doing, is I was thinking, I was getting in stepping into the shoes of my clients and saying, what are their fears right now? What are their biggest worries? What are they freaking out about? And how can I post something that helps them? But instead of asking those thoughts, again, stifling your own creativity, it's easier to just go to our page and like copy the stuff that we're doing and then using that in your own marketing sort of thing. And again, one time, not a big deal to ask the same question, but if it becomes your intentional marketing strategy, right? That to me is very different, where it's like, I'm following this page not out of support, but in order to inform my own strategy. Do you guys see the difference there? Yeah. What other examples do you guys have? So, and maybe state whether it's a good example, an example of what not to do, or maybe that gray area and you're not sure and you want some guidance or advice on it. What are some of those? And we'll stay on for just a little bit longer. Any others? Yes, Claire.
So kind of piggyback on what you had said earlier about when you do see somebody copying some of your work, address them directly.
Yes.
And kind of to follow up on that is they then have the awareness, which they can, pivot and notice,
learn
what they were doing, acknowledge it and change it, or they won't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it definitely is frustrating. Sometimes I hold on to it a little too long, but I think when you do realize that the work will never be the same as the way that you present it, like we said earlier when we first started the call, it will never take off in that same fashion as the way that you've created it, you've presented it, and the way that you've done it. And I think it's less than, release, you've said your piece. If the person doesn't stop, just know that it's something that they're just never going to make it to that same level. So let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is like, it's not a consistent long-term strategy that will work, right? So
Right.
you can sort of hold on to that. But also, you know, if you truly like care about that person and want what's best for them and want to see them reach their full potential and that sort of thing, like it is good to have that conversation, right? And just from a place of love, like I said, and like empathy and compassion of like, I know this happened, you know, this, let's talk about it sort of thing. So yes, I totally agree, Claire. So some, you know, rules of thumb, best practices, you guys, and we'll start to wrap up, is one, ask how you would feel. So if you have done something or, you know, altered, changed, tweaked, whatever, and you're questioning like, did I do enough or did I not? Ask yourself, if somebody had made these changes to something I created and then shared it, would I be okay with that at this point? Like, have I done enough that I would be okay with it? That is, I think the, you know, cardinal rule absolutely applies here. Ask permission. So say, hey, you know, can I share this? Can I use this for another idea that I have? Do you mind if I, you know, share this with my feed or something like that? The other thing is honor their original intent. So I want to take just a second to talk about this because I do think it's a big thing. So, you know, if you go to another financial coach's website and you see that they've got like a 7-day challenge, right? And you sign up so that you can get that challenge, knowing that that challenge was not to be used to inspire other financial coaches or financial professionals, but to serve their prospects well, I am going to ask you to really try and honor and respect that boundary of what their true intention was. And this is really hard. I get that this is hard because you're curious. You're like, ooh, I wonder what they're doing, right? I wonder if there's something in there that I can take. This is where I would much rather have you reach out to that person and say, I see you're doing this. I'm thinking of doing something similar. Do you mind if I sign up for it? Do you mind sharing a little bit of it with me? Are there any, can you give me some ideas of how you created that? Like, I would much rather have you reach out to them and sort of own that conversation versus it feels very passive aggressive, if you will. I don't know if that's really the right term, but it's sort of like behind the radar. Like, it's a freebie on their website. It's probably automated. They may never know that you signed up and got that free 7-day challenge, for example, but you know that you did it. Does that make sense? So you know if you took that route of like trying to use their information that they created and you know what their intention was for it, right? Was for prospects and future clients and to help their, you know, clients, and used it for a different purpose. Okay, so I'm gonna, you know, that is one boundary that I wanna encourage, not because you can't do it. Nobody would know. None of us on this call would know if you did it except for you, okay? Try to remember that, you know, copying is limiting your own creativity. It's limiting your own growth. I do think that's really important. If your goal is to be, you know, reach like a mastery level type of thing and have it be easier, it takes practice and it takes experience, trial and error, doing it wrong, that kind of thing. Ask yourself if, you know, pay attention to your energy. Does it feel like you've done enough? If not, just give credit because it doesn't hurt to give credit. Focus on reinterpreting versus rewording. And then let's see, the other thing that I had was, I had one more example. No, I don't. It was something somebody said earlier. Any other key takeaways that you guys want to share? What are some things that you learned today that you might make sure you do going forward? Some things that you want to practice at, that sort of thing. Anybody want to share a key takeaway? Yes.
So I like the idea that you said that if you don't remember where it came from, you still say that I can't remember where it came from, but I got it from something else. So you may not state the source, but you are acknowledging that it is come from some other intellectual property or such, some other resource.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Good. Good. What else? Jacqueline, I think you had something maybe.
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, you listed the things. I'm not sure if I missed this or not. You might have already said it, but I try to like actually tag the person on social media. Like if they're a friend of mine, if I'm getting it from someone, if I saw like their post, it's their picture especially or anything like that. And It's not like I'm copying their whole strategy, but I'm just sharing and I thought it was helpful. I like to just say who I got it from and actually tag them so that if somebody else, like if that's resonating with somebody else, please go follow them, because if you haven't booked a session with me yet, maybe I'm not your person, but maybe this person who had this great idea is, and we're getting you connected to like the financial help that you need. And isn't that an awesome thing? So I try to tag other coaches when I see them sharing things that are really good as much as possible.
I love that. Yeah, I think you can be seen as like the go-to resource for solutions, regardless of whether that is like you offering that solution or somebody else. I think that that is a really great idea. And I think the last point that I was going to make was like communicate, like have that discussion, have that conversation. Don't let it fester, because that doesn't help you. That's when it really sticks with you longer than it needs to. And then a couple of other things as far as like where to find inspiration. So it is okay to like other financial coaches' pages or Instagram or whatever. You can like them and not follow them at the same time. So one of the things you guys, you know, a lot of people will ask me to like their business page, and I like it, but then chances are I'm going to unfollow it. All that means is it's not in my feed all the time. And this is really more for me than it is for you. And the idea is like, I just can't see personal finance stuff in my feed constantly. What happens is you end up, your sphere of influence changes, and you think everyone knows everything about personal finance, because what you're seeing is like personal finance all day long, because what you're seeing is financial coaches all day long, right? And you start to forget that like your ideal client doesn't have this terminology or doesn't have this same level of understanding. And if you're not careful, your marketing actually shifts to market to your peers versus marketing to your ideal client, simply because it's in front of you all the time. And it totally stifles your creativity. You'll see something, you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Or, you know, something like that. And you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. Why don't my images look like that, right? Like we all have that comparisonitis that we have to be careful of. So try not to like actually follow it too often. I love, you know, following certain business coaches or professional organizers, personal trainers. These are all folks that I think I can gain inspiration from them, but also feel like there is absolutely no way that I can copy their stuff, because it would not make any sense for my industry. I actually have to put a completely unique spin on it, but I'm taking like the general theme, if you will, or I'm sort of like, it's fueling my creativity versus stifling it. So I just wanted to give that to you guys as an example. The other thing is that following referral partners. So if your referral partners or other professionals that send you business have pages, follow them, and don't be afraid to share their great resources. That actually boosts the relationship. It can, you know, they're going to be appreciative. It can help with that reciprocity of like them maybe wanting to send you a referral or, you know, that kind of thing. What other ways do you guys feel inspired? It's very noisy following other coaches. Had to stop. Totally agree, Emily. Yes, I 100% agree. And here's the thing is like, if you're newer, and I know we've got a great community of coaches and I love that, it is better to sort of like not follow everybody all the time than to follow them all the time. You can still be supportive. You can still be their biggest cheerleader. You can still want what is, you know, their success and all of that, and not follow them. Okay. It's not, you know, they're not mutually exclusive sort of thing. Sherry says, I used to spend way too much time trying to be like other coaches because I was watching too many. Yeah. So you guys are all like agreeing with this. Nicole says, I love this. Dorinda says, I have to remind myself all the time that my clients aren't seeing my Facebook feed. So true. Yes, they are like, what's in their feed is totally different. It's not budgeting and saving and net worth and like, you know, all that stuff all the time. Nicole, yes.
I feel like the best place to get inspiration is like your clients, like what you're doing in your client meetings. Like, I think I come out of every single client meeting being like, I have 5 posts that I could post about after that. And I usually just try and wait like a few days so that they might wonder, was she talking about me or is she talking about someone else? Yes. But I feel like my clients are the ones who give me all the inspiration. And when I'm troubleshooting my own problems, because now that you're a financial coach, now you're like attuned to your own problems. Yeah. So I feel like I get so many ideas from myself now because I'm like the biggest project of everybody.
Isn't that awesome? I love that. Yeah, that is so true. Yeah. And
I'm tweeting that.
Too, Oh, go ahead, Claire.
I know, I said I'm tweeting that.
I have my own biggest project. And then quote, and then put in parentheses, and then Nicole Stanley.
Yep.
From me. Don't forget it.
Quote her, right? I'll say too, like, don't ever be afraid to like let somebody know. And this can be just a subtle thing of like, hey, who said that? Like, and this is where, I personally, you guys have probably seen, like, I like to do a lot of like quote images where I just take a quote and I put it in a square box, right? Like, it's not anything glamorous or anything. And I'll do a whole bunch of that at a time. Like, I'll batch all of them. And I typically will do it if I just got done reading a book like that creativity book you guys probably saw. I had like 10 quotes in a row were all from Scott Berkun, right? And I quote him on all of them because as I'm reading, like, I'm being inspired and I want to share those quotes or really good takeaways with others. But what could happen, and it has happened, is I'll create 10 images and I'll forget to put Scott Berkun on one of them, right? Like, as I'm creating them, I'm just kind of like doing an assembly line or whatever. And I never, like, I will always apologize, or like somebody will say like, hey, who said this? And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe that. And I'll update the post to say, quote by so-and-so or something like that. And please make sure you're putting your image on your creations. If you are creating design elements, images, handouts, something like that, please put the watermark on it someplace. And if you're not sure how to do that, you can do it in Canva. So I know a lot of us use Canva. You can put it on there. You're going to upload it just like it's a dark logo. And then you click on it, and in the top right corner, there's a little transparency setting, and you make it so it's almost not totally transparent, right? So it's kind of hard to see, but it at least makes it so if somebody does share it, at least, they're giving you credit that way. Right? So just make sure you're doing that as well. Any other thoughts or questions about this? Any other things that you're not sure about, do's and don'ts, what works well for you, what you're not sure about, anything else?
Hey, Kelsey, I had a question, and I apologize. I had to take a call in the middle of this, so I don't know if you already addressed it. Yeah. But I think my concern sometimes is the other end of the spectrum with me being new and kind of feeling like I can't like ask other people or other coaches for, their feedback until I have developed my own stuff so that I don't feel like I'm taking their stuff. So sometimes it makes me hesitate. Like, I don't want necessarily to feel like what they showed me shaped what I was going to create, because then I don't know whether it's mine or if it's the other person's, even though they may have, like, I may have been, for example, I was at a FinCon panel, and I fell absolutely in love with tailor-made budgets. So, but then that's kind of like the thing in my mind is I'm like, well, I don't want to talk to Erica. I don't see her stuff, because then I don't want to have that. If something looks similar, then I'm thinking I got it from her, versus I can be like, well, no, because I didn't look at any. I have never looked at your stuff yet. So this is how I feel. It's similar. And I'm like, oh, okay. She really is like someone who is going in the direction I want to go to. Now I could go to her and, maybe ask questions or, work with her a little bit or something like that. So like, sometimes I don't know where to make that line.
Yeah. So, okay. So can you clarify what your question is specifically, Nakia?
It's just like how would you handle just kind of like, I know I should be able to come. I mean, like, I just went through the academy, so obviously I'll ask you questions about stuff, but I have this feeling that I need to create everything before I reach out to someone for, just to kind of ask like how their business is. Like, I need to have already created my own so that it doesn't, whether it's me feeling that way or I'm more concerned that somebody's going to think I took all this stuff from, somebody else just because it's similar. I think like I worked with a business coach who used to be a personal finance coach. The way she did it when we went through everything is she had me tell her my entire method, everything that I was doing to work with clients. And then she looked back and said, okay, 3 of these things that you said are pretty much exactly what I used to do. And so she let me see her worksheets to compare them to my worksheets and kind of see kind of look and see what she had been doing, because she had been doing it with clients. I had just done it with like 3 or 4 people, So, but because she wasn't a personal finance coach anymore, she wasn't using any of those things. But at the end of the day, the reason she let me say them is because my ideas were the same, like just not her, her branding and the way she worded stuff, but the idea behind it was the same. So is that clear? I'm kind of like, well, now if I was to see something that Erica did, well, my idea in the beginning could have been from the same place, but now because I asked her some questions first and she told me, well, this is how I do it. Well, now I'm like, okay, so now if I finish it, is it mine or is it hers? Or do I need to say that this came from them, or, that kind of thing?
A couple things is, I would say what was said earlier around using someone's process is not the same thing as like using their creations, right? So like asking like, how do you structure your business or something along those lines, I think is very different than like, hey, how do you word this so I can word it the same way, right? Or how, how, if you were to say like, hey, what tool do you use to create these images? And Erica was like Canva or whatever. That's just a process or a system versus like, can I use your images? Do you see the difference there? The other thing is like, I try to give myself a pep talk before I go looking at someone's thing. So if I'm really feeling stuck, you guys, if I'm just like, I don't even know, I'll give you an example. Right now we are thinking of designing a membership program, like on the client side of things. And I don't know a darn thing about membership programs. So I'm like, okay, I want to go look around and see how are other people doing memberships, right? Like, it's just not, you probably see a million memberships a day, but you don't ever pay attention to like actually the nuts and bolts of it until you want to design one. So I want to go, but what I'm looking at is not how can I do it exactly like them. I'm trying to learn, what do I like? What do I not like? What's resonating with me? What would work? What would not work? Like all of those types of things. I'm likely not going to take like one full example from one person's membership and be like, I need to do all of that exactly the same way. So I think for you, Nikki, what I'm hearing is like, if you were to go to Erica's site, what I would like for you to do, I'd like to encourage you to not just go to her site only if you are looking for an answer to something, because then it is going to give you a bit of tunnel vision, I think. Like it's going to narrow your mind too much. If you are looking for something, try to be very clear ahead of time and say, okay, what is it that I'm seeking answers on? What is it that I'm looking for ideas around? Be very specific, and then go look at like 10 people. That way you're not like taking one whole package from one person and then like duplicating it. Erica, I'm curious, since just so happens to be about you, hey, go figure, like what do you think of that? Like how, hearing like you might be on the receiving end of this, what would you love to suggest that like Nikki would do in this case?
Well, my thing is this, I think when you have a conversation with somebody and they freely give you advice, I mean, that's, and I'm not saying like, I'm not giving worksheets or, all of that. I'm just saying, hey, this sounds good. Like what you're telling me sounds like a good idea to do with your clients. Awesome. And if there's something that I can add value to, and I say, you might want to use this. Awesome. Sure. This was Erica's and I'm using this now. She gave it to me to use it with my clients. But if, like you said, if someone takes, my 7-day challenge and then does the exact same thing, or they go to the website and they just say, oh, I'm just going to change the name on here in the photo and it's all of the same words, then, you know what I mean? When it doesn't feel authentic, I think I'm actually a little bit, I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, budgeting isn't rocket science. It's just that no one does it. You know what I mean? And so I have like I have my worksheets, but I don't actually give those away. You kind of have to go through a few hoops or engage in coaching to do that. And so there are certain things I just don't give away. So I don't think that people without paying can get from me much more than what's on my website. And if it's on there, great, go get it. But my thing is people have to learn to live with themselves in what they're doing. And they're not going to bring coaching to the world the way that I bring coaching to the world. I just really believe that who is for you is for you, and who is for me is for me. And they're going to feel that difference, and they're going to resonate with somebody. And if they're not my client, that's totally fine. But I think we have to catch ourselves. And I've had to do this. I've been in groups where people said, hey, I want to coach with you. And I'm like, let me go to this group owner or the person who put this group on and said, does this feel right? I mean, if they want to work with me, even though they're under this umbrella.
Ooh, that's a great example.
Yeah. And I went and asked them, and because it didn't feel right not to, you know? And so, you know, I think you said it best, Kelsa, when you said, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, you know what I mean? But if it feels like they gave this to me, I'm just going to give them credit. Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you're questioning it, it's probably telling you something, you know, that turmoil, for example, right? Nakia, does that help?
Yeah. Yes, it I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if I was muted still.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, I don't want to be so concerned about it all the time that I can't receive help from anyone or I just like the difference between I received inspiration from someone versus I took their idea. And I'm so concerned with somebody thinking that I took this from somebody else that then maybe I won't even want to say it because
I actually have a feeling, Nakia, like your first relationship with that first mentor of yours might have actually sparked a little bit of this doubt for you, because the fact that you like taught something to your client that was like uniquely yours because you had no idea that anybody else was doing it. And then she watched you and said, oh, this is mine, or I did this too, and I did this too, and I did this too. To me, that like, that's a very unique situation where you thought the idea was yours. You did not like learn it from somebody else and then like apply it in your business. You thought it was yours. And then she sort of said, actually, that was her idea. And I'm going to question whether that was real or not. Like, I'm going to question.
Yeah, no, I don't think she said it to say, no, this isn't your idea. It's my idea. But like, kind of like what Erica was just saying, some of this stuff some of it is just general knowledge. We all know it. And like saving 6 months for your emergency fund isn't somebody's idea that, you know, I need to go back and get credit for. So just being able to navigate those types of things, especially if you're new to the space, then it's kind of like, well, I know that this is kind of common knowledge, but I don't want to see something that someone else did and was like, oh yeah, that's another thing that's just common knowledge, but have someone else that only knows Dave Ramsey and be like, oh, you took that from him. And I'm like, well, no, not exactly.
And here's the reality is, Nakia, and thank you for clarifying. I didn't mean to say that your mentor did that like to put you down by any means. I just meant, I think that whole approach, the work approach that you guys had caused you to doubt that is all I meant. I don't mean that she intentionally did that to you. But I think, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I think I want you to know that and this is for everybody, we will likely all have somebody come to us at some point and say, I saw somebody else teach this and did you get this idea from them? Or, hey, did you hear about that? Or I read a book and this idea is in that book. And you're like, no, like I swear I thought of that myself. And I'm going to give you an example right now. We've taught our clients for the longest time what we call the worst case scenario thought process. When you're making a decision, always analyze the worst case scenario. I've done that for years. It was like 2 weeks ago, I was listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast episode from like years ago, and he talks about the fear setting exercise and how just like you set goals, you also set your biggest fear and you identify your biggest fear. And it is literally the worst case scenario thought process that I use is just what he calls the fear setting. I had no idea it had a name. I had no idea that's what he called it. I didn't know it was like a formal thing. It's just something that I've always done. So somebody could come to me and say, your worst case scenario, exercise is really just Tim Ferriss's fear setting. I would be like, awesome. I had no idea. Like I would just say that, right? And there are times where you might have to do that too. You might have to be like, I swear I thought I made this up. Like, and I did not get this. I was not inspired by this. I had never heard of it before. It is okay to say that too, Nakia. Does that make sense? Like, yeah, it might be that somebody else is doing it simply because, yeah, it was a good idea. So of course somebody else thought of it too, right? But there's a lot of smart people. Financial coaches are smart people. So we might all have some similar ideas, right? but it's whether or not that idea came from that person or not. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it did. Okay. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Kelsey, you know what's so funny is you sent an email, one email back in the beginning of this whole COVID crisis that was really good. You said, here's how we can help during this time, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, that's brilliant. Here's how I can help my community, blah, blah, blah. And it was different stuff because I don't offer the same stuff, or it wasn't for the same audience. I don't remember, but it was such a great, because I thought this makes it easy for my newsletter subscribers to see how I can help. And then I had like 5 new conversations from that email just because they knew how to re-engage with me or get a quick question answered or pop on my Zoom call that I was that I was promoting or whatever, because that was the thing I was doing. And it just, instead of bringing them inspiration, I just said, oh yeah, these are the 4 things that you can do right now to make certain that you are ahead of this.
Yeah.
And engage with me. And I was like, that's awesome.
Well, I would say this is a perfect example, Erica, of like the reinterpretation. So what you did is you said, okay, Kelsey sent an email that let her people know how you can get help right now. Yeah. I want to let my people know how they can get help, but how I'm going to tell them they can get help or the actions they can take are going to be totally different. So I was inspired by her idea, but I'm not copying her email, right? Like that's a perfect example of like feeling inspired by something versus like, had you actually just taken the idea then and said like, okay, I'm going to copy the intro, I'm going to copy the outro, and in the middle, I'll just put my services. That would still to me be like a form of copying. Does that make sense? Or like just not, enough sort of thing. So David, yes.
So you got me thinking that I can use things from other sources, like one's popping into my head from a TV show. So how would I attribute that?
So tell me what it is.
Well, there's a couple of quotes from Jag that keep popping into my head.
I would just quote Jag, or if that's a character from Jag or something. And I actually just did this. I did like a series of Chuck Norris quotes. And I love Chuck Norris, by the way. And I just quoted Chuck Norris all the time. Like, you just quote Jag. That's what I would do. Now, what you can do, David, is you can do the quote in like an image, and then in the body of the post, put your interpretation on that. So talk about like, why is that relevant to personal finance, or why does that apply to budgeting and that sort of thing. And that is all of your own thought. Like how you are making it relevant, how you are applying it is unique to you. But the quote itself is from a movie. Like let people, see that. They might just think it's funny. I'll get them to laugh and connect with what you're saying all at the same time. That's like the best kind of thing.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I'll give you an example. We just shared a podcast episode today that we recorded yesterday, and it was all about how to financially prepare for, things to open back up again. So as you start adding expenses and all of that. So all of you can go ahead and take that idea if you want and do a blog post on it or something. Chances are what you think people need to do to financially prepare might be different than mine. So you're not copying, you're just inspired by the topic, right? So in it, I actually talked about Marie Kondo. And I took something from her professional organizing, the idea of like, does it spark joy? I quoted her, I mentioned her book, but I said, like, before you add an expense back in, as things start opening back up, ask yourself, as Marie Kondo would, does it spark joy, right? So I literally I gave her credit. I didn't try and like say, does it spark joy is like a question I came up with to ask, right? Like I actually did get that idea from her. See what I mean, David? Okay. I think it's great to get that inspiration from other people. And I think it makes you connect with people, because if somebody loves Marie Kondo, they're now like, oh, Kelsey knows Marie Kondo too, right? So it's just one of those things that helps people to connect with you on a different level, which I think is good. Cool. One thing that I did want to say, like, I think, in the Financial Coaches Unite group, there are a lot of files that people have shared, handouts that they use and that sort of thing. And yes, they put those in there to share freely with you. If you are going to take something like that and you are going to maybe use it in your marketing, I would ask permission first. I think the idea is that those people uploaded files in there, handouts, because the idea is they assume you're going to be inspired by it, create your own thing, maybe do it with a client, one client, not necessarily with the intention. Again, I think it comes back down to like, what do you think the person's intention was when they shared that with you? And are you using it with that same intention in mind? And if not, it's not to say you can't do it, just ask first. The other person might be like, oh yeah, totally, go ahead, it's not a big deal. I use it in my marketing all the time too, no problem. Or they may say, you know what, I would like for you to, you know, maybe just credit it if you do, but always leave it up to them. I feel like if is their, I know, right? Jacqueline says, Kelsa, people upload those to win the 21-day challenge. Let's be honest. Cough, cough, Sherry. Well, there are some great ones in there. So if their intention was just to win and not to share, then you may want to ask them before you share it if you have their permission. Like I said, it will make you feel better. If not, you're going to feel yucky and like, should I do this? Should I not? It's not worth it. It's not worth having that negative energy around in your business. I really don't think so. So I hope this spurs the conversation. I hope this lets you guys know that instead of like hovering with in quiet or in private or in shame of like, should I or should I not do this? Be open about it. Ask, say, hey, I want to do this. Have I done enough? Or is it, you know, okay for me to share this? Have I, you know, am I copying this or have I put a unique spin on it? Let's support each other and not shame a person if they ask that question because they're not sure. Because I do think that happens a little bit too, where a person doesn't want to ask because they feel stupid or they feel badly for not knowing. And really the reality is this is a massive gray area. And let's have it be an open space where people can ask those questions. We can give them guidance. We can talk them through that and not shame them for not knowing whether that was okay or not. So I want to make sure that like that is one of the biggest takeaways that comes from this discussion is that we're all much more open to like lending that ear to each other. Sound good? Okay. So I'm going to end with a quote because I always like to end with a quote. We are way over on time. Let's see. So we will wrap up quickly. Thank you, first of all, so much for the suggestions, the ideas, the feedback, the questions. You guys are awesome. We are all going to learn together. And it makes me so proud, seriously. So my quote is with that in mind. Leaders never use the word failure. They look upon setbacks as learning experiences. And that is by Brian Tracy. So if you've done it wrong before, we probably all have. It's okay. Once we know better, we do better, right? So everybody have a wonderful night. Cheers. And I will talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kelly.